Console errors and problems plagued several of our early gaming systems and electronics. The ones I can really see clear are PlayStation 2's startup disk errors in that empty void of towers and the Xbox 360's red ring of death. Well, what if there was a hidden world of terrifying startups that your console could compose? I'm not talking about simple error screens due to disk error, like I mentioned just before, or any anti-piracy screens, although those are terrifying in and of themselves. I'll be covering several console booting errors and a few exceptions that will no doubt make you feel a little uneasy. From a wide variety of PlayStation 1s to almost depressing MacBook errors, I have no doubt you won't have known all of them. Starting off with personified fear, a name given to an error screen on the PlayStation 1. One of the most well-known of PlayStation's many, this error occurs when you try to insert an unreadable disk or play on a console with corrupt BIOS files. So you insert a very scratched disk or a pirated one, which fully overrides the BIOS, creating this horror. The standard startup occurs with the Sony logo and music. However, when it fades to the next logo, it happens to just stay black, and instead of hearing the chimes after the transition, you hear that short glass breaking sound right before the chimes, playing in reverse and at about 1/4 of the original speed. All this due to data interruption from not understanding how to properly read it. Much of the PlayStation 1's error sounds are give or take on how creepy they are, and I'd consider this one mild at best out of the many errors to come. For our second error, we have the Sega CD, which allows the Genesis to play CD games and add a lot more storage to your console. With the introduction of CDs, what would happen if you put a ROM for the Sega CD into a CD player? Well, a warning message letting you know that CD-ROM you put inside is only for the Sega. Unlike our other errors, this one isn't text but a robotic female narrator.
This disc contains CD-ROM data that may damage your audio system. Please press stop on your disc player now. Please stop playing this disc immediately.
She repeats several lines trying to make you eject the disc. Each warning seems more urgent and direct than the last. She mentions it can damage the CD player since this isn't your standard disc but a CD-ROM. She tells you to stop now, then finally says to eject the disc immediately. While all this is happening, heavily distorted and creepy scratching guitar riffs are being played in the background. This isn't the only spoken error in consoles, such as the Dreamcast just informing you in multiple languages, not entirely robotic and as monotone. I feel the Sega CDs are more direct in response to the error, making it a little more creepy to listen to. The idle sounds of the original Xbox. I'd say this might be the most well known besides the next entry, although a little less frightening, as the next one is pure nightmare fuel. The original Xbox was Microsoft's attempt to make their first console, and they really wanted to make it sort of out of this world, a future technological piece. So yes, intentional and not an error, but it's definitely unsettling and worth mentioning among the other console sounds. Most of the Xbox's ambient noise, when left idle, were pretty normal, with some of them actually sounding pretty cool. Although certain periods of each ambient track did have contenders for being pretty frightful. They seem to welcome uneasy feeling into your room as you let your console sit idle. Each audio set was played at random when you would turn your Xbox on. If you were aware enough, you'd hear the sampled audio clips that Microsoft used from NASA. Not terrifying in the scenes of disturbing recordings, but how Microsoft edited them to sound more unknown and futuristic. That doesn't help the creepy factor though, especially if you walked back into your room in the middle of the night from a break to hear some unknown jumbling voice talking through your TV. That's also alongside several other samples among the audio tracks. So thanks Microsoft for not letting us leave our Xbox alone without freaking us out. On to the real kicker of the video. Fearful Harmony on the PlayStation 1, most likely the most well-known and disturbing error, caused by inserting a damaged disc or one that isn't PlayStation compatible. Also able to occur with a console that has a mod chip to bypass copy protection, or by disc swapping on a standard console. Very similar steps such as the first entry, only this happened with only partially overriding the BIOS, unlike personified fear. During the error, you'll get the normal orange logo boot up, but once fading to black, you hear the low glass shatter noise and nothing else for quite a while. About half a minute after though, Fearful Harmony starts. The screen distorts into a messed up logo of the beginning and post black screen. Sometimes it distorts into other patterns, shown in several other videos. The chimes you normally hear are extended over several minutes, causing a pretty unsettling high-pitched noise. With the noise and continuous distorted visuals, this definitely fits the most terrifying error of the PlayStation 1, and just about every other console. Maybe not entirely for how unsettling the audio is, but how overwhelming the volume is and unknown with how long it's due to last. It's almost as if the console is screaming at you. Our last entry was our best PlayStation startup corruption, but now let's get into its second generation, the PlayStation 2 and its red screen of death, an error that occurs when you insert, you guessed it, an unreadable disc. This could also happen with other media discs, but for the most part there seems to be other errors associated with those. Inserting the unreadable disc, the standard startup visuals and sounds play, but instead of the normal game startup, you get dropped deeper into the towers. A red hue fills your screen and the start of a new chime plays, but only briefly as the sound gets pulled away. Waiting on the screen longer, you start to hear wind making the silence you're sitting in more terrifying. Although not super scary, but the feeling you get from it definitely isn't very welcoming. The wind blows as you continue to fall into this windy and cloudy abyss-like vortex, with a couple of red highlighted cubes floating with you. For how boring standard disc reading error screens can be, this one makes it a little more fun with a creepy twist. Alright, enough about PlayStation for now. What about the beloved GameCube? The console has a secret startup audio replacement for the standard cube introduction. I could have shoved this entry right before the last, but I wanted a little buffer since there's a lot about PlayStation. This one isn't a crash, similar to how Xbox's wasn't, but again, a little creepy, and I think it fits with its unexpectedness. Similar to all the other entries, you probably wouldn't expect to hear this, but holding the Z button on a GameCube controller as the normal startup appears makes each cube roll sound be replaced with squeaking noises on every square, and on the final jump, a child's laugh. Definitely not meant to be creepy, but in the right scenario, I'm sure it's pretty frightening. I play a lot of games closer to night, and if I was some little kid just messing around with my controller and accidentally booted up my GameCube with this startup, I'd probably turn it off out of fear. I know it can be seen as innocent, but who expects their normal boot screen sounds to be replaced? Especially with the kid's laugh. Heading into our second to last PlayStation 1 error, this console was just the bread and butter for nightmare-fueled console sounds and corruptions. With it being such an early piece in gaming and its advancements, it's hard not to imagine there weren't this many errors. This one goes by the name of Forbidden Image, and it's produced by inserting a foreign disc, but more often than not, specifically a PC disc into a mod-chipped console. The startup is exactly the same as a standard startup, but once it fades into black and starts reading the disc, it plays the chimes, but this time the visuals are all contorted, nothing is loading properly, and it's mostly void of anything legible. You'll have the PlayStation logo and a series of letters at the bottom of the screen with some other visual tears. Personally, this one is pretty unsettling. It seems to just about boot up correctly just to leave your console in a state to be barely working. It's like getting the blue screen of death on your PC, except this one fills your view with no color and resolve. How about our most obscure one? Maybe just for me though, since I've never owned a Mac. We have the Macintosh's second generation crash screen. I guess I've just made all the exceptions with this video. First we had some non-errors and now a non-console. Regardless, its boot up can still be crashed. From around 1987 to 1995, there were the chimes of death and the sad Mac icon. This is what plagued MacBook crashes. Not sure why this occurred, but PCs crash for every other reason all the time. I'm sure more so with early hardware similar to the PlayStation 1. Regardless, the little logo and the audio is strange enough as it is. The earliest version of the error ended in the sound of a car crash. From here on out, there was a distinct chime of the audio. However, every generation slowed the chime down until it sounded like this on the Macintosh 5300 SC. I think the 5300's version is the creepiest. It's not just the slowness of the normal jingle, but also the extra portion they added at the end. Along with if you got the sad Mac icon, it's just a little depressing to watch your Mac crash like this. Besides the chimes of death and sad Mac, we have the iPod and browser for Apple devices. They each had a similar icon for the crash screens, but without the audio. On to our last crash, and my favorite at that. A combination of the scariest. What do we all know? It's the PlayStation 1 again. This time with dreadful harmony, caused by the system failing to read the logo data correctly. From what I've read, This might only be able to happen on an emulator, which would make sense on how it could mess up reading the logo data wrong. The entire error is almost a perfect combination of every PlayStation 1 error we've talked about so far. It has the slow glass break sound like in Personified Fear, but continues to play the chimes similar to Fearful Harmony. Only this time, the chimes are much slower, and on top of this, it seems to share the same image as the Forbidden Image error, unlike the regular Fearful Harmony, which has a jumbled mess. A perfect ending to encapsulate all the PlayStation sounds and visuals that terrified us throughout this video, and as kids, if you ever experienced any of these. So, what did we learn about our favorite consoles? Well, the PlayStation 1 can scare the hell out of us when it breaks, but also, it's really fun to look back at older hardware and see how they were engineered and how they crash. Our electronics still crash today, but none as unknown and as far out as the ones 20 plus years ago. Especially when you look at Xbox striving to feel a little out of this world, but it seems like PlayStation had them beat by a mile. I feel like this was just the surface. I didn't mention other small errors with just pictures or other audio cues with crashes, and especially anti-piracy screens. Regardless of what I didn't cover and may in the future, I hope you learned something, got frightened, and enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.